Well, welcome to a conversation that I'm very much looking forward to with Jonathan Lyonhart, Dr. Jonathan Lyonhart. Dr. Lyonhart is currently assistant professor of theology and philosophy at Lincoln Christian University in Illinois. Replaced in that position a good friend of mine, Christopher Simpson. So there's a sort of a, rich tradition that he's stepping into there at that Midwestern college. He's a fellow of the Cambridge Center for the Study of Platonism, founder of the Numinous Institute for Faith and Neurodiversity. Ooh, let's talk about that. And he's co-host of Spiritually Incorrect podcast. Jonathan, you've got a lot of scholarly experience. You've got in writing, a lot of classroom experience, and you've also got a lot of ministerial experience too, I believe. So for all of this and for the conversation that's to come, I'm really grateful for you spending some time with me here and being in this conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. So
I love having these conversations, and because having theological conversations is fun for me. I mean, that's sort of why I got into this business, and the wonderful gift of Zoom is that I'm not now just limited to people whose phone numbers I can find or who are sitting in the same room with me. So I kind of figured, let's you and me have the kind of conversation we might have if we were at a pub, not like the characters in your book, and then record it so others can join us too.
I'll get a swig, a drink
There you
to
go.
accompany me.
Oh, cheers, and I'll use my funky little blue tie-dye cup here as well.
So
Jonathan, you have written a book with a wonderful title, which is what you and I are going to be talking about. Monotheism, an absurdly arrogant attempt to answer all the problems of the last 2,000 years in one night at a pub. And so you stage a kind of Schleiermacherian Christmas Eve dialogue in a pub full of references to philosophers and theologians and sort of what I would call sort of, Gen X wheelhouse pop culture. And which I found really fun. You're a very funny author. But I think my first question for you is where'd the idea for this come from? What generated the idea of writing this particular book for you?
yeah, so the underlying idea I had, where I compare the Trinity to the origins of the universe and try to glean insights from that, I had that almost 15 years ago, when I was an undergrad. And I've kind of just slowly toiled away at it, and it's kind of framed how I think about a lot of different things. And so that's been in the background for a long time. The specific idea for, three people in a pub hashing it out back and forth in between taking a drink or a bite, that came while I was doing my graduate work at Regent College, before I went on to do the doctoral stuff. And I just started writing it, and I enjoyed it, and so I just kept writing. And the particular Socratic dialogue format perhaps comes from my Platonic background as well. I just think writing in the dialogue format is so fun. It makes crazy, difficult, insanely complex ideas understandable, because well, I think this da, 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 and then the other person can go, wait, that doesn't make sense, break that down for me, and then you can say, oh well, I will break it down for you, da, 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 da. And I think it's that dialectical back and forth that allows you to combine complexity and simplicity all at once. One person's complex, the other person's constantly slowing them down, and it kind of gives you the best of both worlds. And in some ways that makes this a very popular level book, because my goal was for it to be readable. But in other ways, this was meant to be a genuinely academic pursuit. And I think for me, the Socratic dialogue isn't just a popular level format. It's the most ancient of all academic formats, going back to the Greeks. And so that very much mirrors my intention for this. The title makes it sound like it's solely popular level, but I very much am trying to answer everything in one book. And I really am, I think I'm trying to afford an academic proposal that I'd like to have be treated that way and responded to.
Yeah,
So
fantastic. Yeah, that's the I mean, I mentioned the Schleiermacher Christmas Eve dialogue. You also first page you name check David Hume, and that the natural religion dialogue. It's making me think about that line from the line about the dialectic itself in that Socrates gives. I can't remember which dialogue it is, but he's something like the dialectic is a gift given to us by the gods. And the yeah, what it does, like you're saying, what it does is it's this sense of like um ideas are boundless, and our ways into them are are step by step. And so you can have this character who's in charge of, let me see if I can explain this, but in order to actually break that into steps, we get to bust in with one of in your dialogue one of the other two people, and say, now hold on, how about this question, or am I understanding this right, or doesn't that, and it's almost
Yeah.
like you've got a sort of interlocutor that's sort of built in, like almost like you have and in some ways like you might have in a classroom discussion. Yeah, so
Yeah.
it's a wonderful format to pull off what you're trying to do.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, I greatly enjoyed it. Enjoyed writing it. So
You
that's part of it. I don't write anything unless I'm having fun writing it. So part of this format was not for you, the audience. It was for me. If I'm going to get through writing a few hundred pages in a book, I need to be having a blast doing it, or I'm just not going to do it. So,
yeah, the
you know,
there was that wonderful mix of pop culture references and then just sort of theological and philosophical nerd references. Your Edie character who would shout out things like Origin's knife or something about the Kardashians or something like that. Yeah, you're having a lot of fun writing this.
yeah.
You clearly have some chops in analytic philosophy and theology. Um, just from just combing through your footnotes. Is that the background that you come from, or what are the tools that you bring to this?
Yeah. So I think perhaps getting into the basic idea of the book would help explain this a bit more. The basic argument of the book is the Trinity doesn't really seem to make sense to me. When I look at it, how can God be three and one up there, and yet somehow Jesus down here? It doesn't really make sense to me. And so, as a younger person, I just sort of said, well, it doesn't make sense. I won't believe in it. But then when I looked at the origins of the universe, how did anything come to be at all? I realized it also doesn't make sense. And actually, for pretty much the same reasons. I started to notice this parallel between the Trinity and cosmology. And it almost seemed like the same philosophical enigma that underlied the origins of the universe was the same one that was underlying the Trinity. It's the same problem in two different dresses. And so the basic idea became, well, the Trinity might not make sense, but neither does the existence of the universe. And so perhaps the Trinity makes as much sense to believe in as our own existence.
Mm.
And from that, I try to sort of build a rational justification for embracing the irrational, sort of a non-mysterious staircase to get to mystery, and then sort of pull the ladder up after you in a sneaky kind of way. And I think in that way, a lot of the steps I took to make this argument feel very at home within the analytic camp. And then suddenly you get to the conclusion and you're like, wait, that's not very analytic. He's kind of negating the whole logical structure of the whole thing. And I think in many ways that's very true to who I am. Is I have this analytic desire to know and to articulate and to confine things to boxes. And yet there's this other side of me as well, this mysterious, paradoxical, passionate, almost continental feeling person that just wants to go read some poetry in a stream somewhere, or so. It's and I think that is very, very much to the heart of the book. I think analytics would like the argument I've make in the book, but not the conclusion I get to. And I think continental people might like the conclusion, but not the way I got there.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of the part of the whole tension and paradox of the work itself.
Have you ever done any work with Pavel Florinsky, Russian theologian?
No, not a terrible amount. No.
There's a chapter in his Pillar and Ground of the Truth that it doesn't. It's not obviously doing the same thing as you, but he is a it becomes a kind of mystical Trinitarian encounter with the logic of non-contradiction.
Hmm.
So he's very much sort of like he's wrestling it out in a way that, you know, Bertrand Russell might, but then what he comes to in the end is something very different, you know, where he
Yeah.
lands.
Well,
Uh,
I'll have to look more into that.
yeah,
So,
yeah. I want to read a passage that toward the end of your book that to me really um, sort of is the kind of the big payoff of what you said, not just like you said, not just the distinct arguments that you're making along the way, but the sort of the big. I hear it now in terms of your explanation. I hear it as the sort of the big unfolding insight that you had early on about the way that theology and cosmology map onto one another, especially in terms of our understanding. That whole question about um, the epistemological question as it encounters that argument. And this
hmm.
is from page 256. Vlad is your Socrates character. I think for me, Vlad was Socrates. I'm not sure who Mira was. We can talk about that. But Edie, I know this doesn't fit the dialogue format, but Edie for me was a kind of Midwestern Ivan Karamazov.
Hmm.
That's really that was what was happening in my mind as I read.
I
But
can see that.
this
Yeah.
is Vlad. Vlad says precisely because God is both rational. Vlad first takes a deep breath, collecting his thoughts, which was a sort of signal to me, like, okay, let me see. Here comes a big payoff. Precisely because God is both the rational logos of becoming and the transcendent mystery of being, he can be spoken of using rational argument and language without simply turning into a projection of human thought. There's a wonderful example, I think, of what you were of the theological principle that you were just talking about. That um, you are paying deep attention to the kind of discursive moves that we can follow using human logic, and doing that in a way that doesn't eclipse the sort of you know that that which transcends our way of thinking, our human logos, our human reasoning, and that just that sense of, hey, here's the paradox, people. This is both. This is both, as you said, being and becoming. This is both, you know, human rationality and a kind of irrational or supra rational or beyond rationality that all of this, I would say, nests within or exists within. You want to say more about that passage or more about the connections you're making with it?
No, I think that very much gets at the idea. I mean, if there is going to be something that is other, genuinely other, and not merely an extension of ourselves projected out, it would have to be other beyond our mental, emotional, rational categories. And yet, precisely because it is beyond those categories, precisely because it is genuinely other, it's able to be other and close and near and imminent to us at the same time. And I would say, no, that doesn't make sense. But that doesn't make sense according to my categories. If it is other, it can be other than my categories and within my categories at the same time, because that's what it means for it to be other than my categories. And that excites me a lot and makes a lot of sense, even as it transcends sense. It makes sense why it doesn't make sense.
Even as
Uh,
it makes sense, yeah.
so,
Um, Another of the moves that you make, that, and I'm not sure I've got the reference here right for it, but a move that you make that I sort of was I could feel myself sort of itching for it. I was like, yeah, but how are we gonna do this thing? And so when you landed it, it was for me a big payoff was the what I would describe as the Trinitarian shape of the incarnation. So when you spend most of the book laying out, you're answering Edie's question about the Trinity, but then Edie's got other questions. He's got a whole list of them because you're going to answer all the questions of the last 2,000 years. But he's got the big theological questions about incarnation and free will and all of it. And you make a really nice sort of, like, if you've understood this whole big argument, this Trinitarian argument about the link of theology and cosmology, then you're going to see this replayed in a particular way in the incarnation, because what you have in the incarnation is a joining of, let's say, knowable becoming with unknowable being that is also both at the same time in a way that can't be separated. And
Yeah.
that's actually the Trinitarian argument you just made. So that was a nice moment for me.
Oh, good. Well, I'm glad to hear that. And it was an unsurprised. I wasn't expecting some of the things to come together as well as they did, or at least as well as I hoped and thought they did. Particularly the stuff about no one gets to the Father except for the Son. This sense that, well, if being is really transcendent in the way that we're talking about in the book, at least, then only if it is somehow paradoxically one with some source of becoming can we access it at all. And that I didn't think of that when I first came up with the idea a long time ago. That later fell into place, but it made a lot of sense for something I've always been uncomfortable with, which is, why does Jesus have to be the bridge for which the Father is known? Why does he say no one comes to the Father except through the Son? So
Yeah. Yeah. So you find your way to this explanation of, well, Jesus is the bridge. Jesus is the bridge to the Father, but only because Jesus as bridge to Father is itself replaying the story of who God is from all eternity.
yeah,
Yeah,
for sure.
sort of coherence to it, which is something I really value in theology, about the, just making those connections. This is not, theology is not the explanation of all the random ideas that don't hold together, but it's some way of saying, look, let's, like you do with your argument in the pub, you say, let's see if we can actually trace the connections and stand back at them and decide whether we find them compelling or not.
Oh.
Yeah. So back to the cosmology as theology argument for a second. This is so this is a little bit of a pushback on it, because as I was reading, especially coming to the end of that first, it may have been the second chapter, where a lot of this, a lot of the sort of the heart of that connection to the Trinity, of cosmology to the Trinity, was coming out. I started to get this worry that there was a kind of, I'd say, like a kind of soft Arianism to what you were saying. And now you defend against this well, like you early on state, like, this is not, I am not saying the second person of the Trinity is a creature. But when you make, you sort of, you set being in opposition to becoming, and align being with the Father, sometimes even suggesting that sort of this is, think of your classical theistic image of the sky god, the transcendent sky god at a distance. That's what Christians mean by Father. But then opposed to that is the one with the sort of the wherewithal to enter into the particularity of the world. That starts to feel to me like, oh, so there's like, maybe it's not quite, it's not quite Arian, but it's more like that fuzziness around origin, where he's like, okay, there's one triune God, but the Father is the God, and the Son is sort of God, sort of leaning down towards creation. So there were moments in there where I started to feel like, is this,
Yeah.
I feel about this contrast of being and becoming, in which, as sort of names right on Father and Son.
Yeah, and I think those problems would be very real if I had been trying to make this case within a logical framework.
Yeah.
If I had been trying to say the Son is just the Son and the Father is just the Father, and never, there's no point at which it's kind of both. But I think the whole point is, somehow mysteriously, this Son of becoming is genuinely one with the Father, such that he too is eternal and isn't the first creature. No, that, like, he is eternal fully. And it's not like the Father creates him. he is the creative becoming through which the Father can begin to create anything, such that it can be said that only through Jesus were all things made.
Hmm.
Um, and so I think, I mean, it's hard to get into this without getting into the whole argument of the book, because the argument of the book is very different from what a lot of people are talking about in Trinitarian stuff. So I want to start explaining this, but I'm not pinning it to something anyone has a category quite yet for. So it's hard to do that. But yeah, I think if you were to really sort them out and say the Son is this and the Father is this, and they're not each other, that then yeah, I think it would be Arianism. And I think that's the reason we always slip into Arianism, is because logically that's kind of where you have to go, because the Trinity doesn't make sense. But my whole point was that, well, it doesn't make sense, but it parallels the origins of the universe, and I still believe that we exist, so it makes as much sense as our own existence. So I'm gonna rationally, or as rationally as anyone who believes in their own existence, proceed to talk about the Father and Son as though they were different and as though they were one at the same time, which I think is kind of the scandal of the Trinity from the beginning. It's always been, how is this guy down here talking about himself as if he were the Father up there? That doesn't make sense, Jesus. And so I don't see myself as importing a broad philosophical thing on the text. I see myself as peeling back the philosophical, rational assumptions we've imposed upon the text when we try to apologize for the radical claims Jesus made.
Yeah,
Um,
good. That's good. I thought of language that I have been toying around with about of Trinitarian appropriations, um, which is language that we don't use a ton in Trinitarian theology, but I think ought to use more, because it gets at, for me, it gets at some of that. Yeah, well, what it gets at is that exactly that problem that you're naming of how do you it all identify the character of a Trinitarian person without so distinguishing them that you've created something other than a unified God.
yeah.
Uh, and so, for instance, I was sort of running it through. Like often, what we'll do is we'll say like um, the like the Nicene Creed will say that the will assign creation to the Father. I believe in God the Father, Creator.
Hmm.
Uh, but any Trinitarian theologian is going to say, well, hold on, that doesn't mean that the Son and the Spirit aren't involved. So are not involved. So what do you do about that? And usually appropriations is a way of saying, well, it is all of the Trinity is involved, and yet the character of the Father is the one to whom this most appropriately belongs, or something like that. And
Yeah.
so it's not, the Son is the one who redeems us on the cross, but that doesn't mean the Son, the Father, and the Spirit aren't God redeeming us on the cross, but the Son is the one. So I was sort of running it through some of that mill and thinking, well, maybe you could sort of be this being, becoming, in both, you know,
Yeah.
three categories. I was thinking, well, maybe instead of the Father is being, but and the Son is becoming, and the Spirit is both. The Father is being, becoming in both, from the sort of through the lens of, or from the category of being.
Of being, yeah. And I think that's precisely, I mean, I'm fine with nuancing it in those ways, because I think what you're saying is always what people are saying. We have to say that the Son is this, but he's not only this, and the Father is more primarily that, but he's not the only one who's that. I think, yeah, those caveats should be put around everything I've said in the book.
Yeah,
Of course. And in some ways, my attempt in the book is to make sense of how we can make those caveats, how we can say the Son is this, but also the Father is that.
yeah,
Because, well, the Son is becoming, but he's also being. The Father is being, but yeah, he's also becoming. Well, those are precisely the sort of things that don't make sense. And I guess my way of trying to still believe in them, despite them not making sense, is by tying them to the origins of the universe and saying, but they make as much sense as the fact that I'm here now talking to you.
yeah.
And so in many ways, I would be like, yes, exactly what you're saying. And I would say it precisely because of what I'm saying.
Mhm.
Yes, the Father can be this, but also the Son can be it. And there's no problem there. It might seem irrational, but it makes as much sense as anything existing at all.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, that's good. And I love, so one of the really generative parts of all of this for me is the particular categories that you're using of being and becoming, and then the unity of being and becoming. Um, Thinking of the way that Augustine talks about the distinctions of the triune, the distinctions of the triune persons are really just the relationships. Like the only thing that the Son is that the Father is not is a son.
hmm,
So like that node of relationship is the only thing that distinguishes them. And so you get it. That's how he gets away from like, if the Son's wisdom, is the Father not wisdom? He gets away from saying the only thing that can distinguish them at all is the relationship. Well, I see being, becoming, and the unity of being, becoming as a really generative way of saying that. Like there's no stuff of being that becoming lacks. It's just becoming is not being, you know. And it's sort of that it's that it's there's that allows you to get that sort of unity of nature and distinction of hypostasis, to use that language. It seems
yeah.
like your terms for that work really well.
Yeah, I think there's definitely lots of potential parallels and different ways of framing it. So, yeah.
um let's see, I made a note about oh yeah, this is my one other note of pushback ahead here. You've got
Push away.
we
That's
need
the dialectic. That's the whole book.
we got
That's
to do it. We got
yeah.
to do it. We got to make the conversation worthwhile. Um, Vlad compares the son's becoming to his wife's beauty. Remember that? Remember that section? Um, but please don't inform her that she's not the only beautiful person in the world.
Yeah.
So the line is, so the son is becoming, but not all becoming is the son. Just as my wife is beautiful, but not all beautiful people are my wife. Please don't tell her I said that. The former.
Yeah.
Um, so obviously, I mean, I see what you do. I see what you're getting out there. You're wanting to say it's. I mean, this is where I see you as guarding against that kind of Arianism that says the son becomes like a creature becomes, whereas God is pure being, the Father is pure being. But the
Yeah.
comparison to me uh, leaves something out, which is the son. If the son is becoming, the son isn't just another becoming, like all generated things are becoming. So it can't sort of stand in contrast in the way that a beautiful person is not the thousand other beautiful people or
Yeah.
creatures around her.
Yeah. And I think the major thing I was trying to defend there against was actually pantheism.
Hmm.
Wasn't Arian, but I think there are maybe two sides of the same coin in that particular way. Um, I guess I would see Christ as becoming, as sort of becoming qua becoming, in the same way that God, God is being itself, not a being.
Yeah.
There's becoming and there's becomings, plural. And I guess I would see Jesus as becoming qua becoming. Because becoming and being, I believe, are paradoxically wed, um, becoming has an eternal form, if you will. He is the eternal becoming, that earthly becoming is made in the image of, perhaps, but is not just another one in the same line of.
Yeah.
There's a qualitative distinction there that I very strenuously try to uphold. Um, and so, yeah, Christ is not the first creature. He is the means by which any creature can be created to begin with. Because as soon as you say God began to create the world, God already has temporality and becoming in him in order to begin to create. And
Mm.
so there's actually becoming that has to precede the act of creating.
Yeah.
And
That's
I'm trying to get back to that becoming that exists before creation, and not just the creation of our world, but the creation of anything at all. The ability of God to begin to do anything because for a timeless being to begin to do anything already has to have time within itself in order to then begin to create. So I'm trying to think back before befores,
Yeah.
and that's where Christ is not a becoming, he's becoming itself. Whatever it is that's eternally with God, uh, and is God, he was God and he was with God, is what Jesus is, and not another in the line of creation, but the one who allows the line to in the dominoes to be kicked off to begin with.
Yeah. I was
So,
on recently on a Grail Country podcast. The name of the podcast, wonderful
oh
name.
yeah, with yeah,
You,
yeah,
you know that
yeah,
lady. Yeah.
Nate Hell, yeah.
And I was on there with Jordan Daniel Woods, and we were talking about his Maximus, sort of ongoing Maximus project. And Maximus's wonderful, sort of rich, fertile language of the logos and the logoi. Um, and this part of your dialogue was making me think of um, that intimate connection of all created things as little words to the word itself, the eternal word itself. So that, yeah, I think the way you said it, like this is logos qua logos is the nesting place for the logoi. And in that sense, even part of what the argument that Jordan has been pushing, which I'm sort of 80% convinced on, is that this leads Maximus to say that you really can't make any distinction at all between creation and incarnation. The creation of the world is the incarnation of the world, because that's this movement of expression of the logos into materiality. And there's nothing, the logoi don't exist without the logos, and at the same time the logos doesn't exist without the logoi. So all of the, in your language, all of the little becomings have to be contained within that eternal becoming that is the second person of the Trinity.
So I wouldn't, I don't know if my argument's inconsistent with that. I don't know if my argument goes as far as to necessitate that,
Yeah.
because within what I'm saying, I'm not saying that Christ is the becoming of which all other becomings participate. Yeah. It's more chronological than that. He has to precede the existence of any other becomings.
Right.
And so, yeah, it's not so much that all of becomings have to participate in him as becoming. It's he has to be here before the whole thing gets kicked off. Is, I think, maybe a difference there, but a potential parallel between what Jordan and I are doing is, I think sometimes we have this tendency to see God as a timeless entity, and then the incarnation is when the timeless entity then comes down into time, 2000 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that. I think there's something of becoming that is part of what Jesus is and brings to the Trinity, and that is eternally bound up in the cycle, such that not that he's created, but that he is begotten, that he is the eternal in process. In some sense, not in the sense of process theology to the negation of classical theology, but as in some ways overcoming that dualism, precisely because my point is, yeah, you're going to end up having to choose between process or classical theology if you're sticking to logic. But the universe isn't logical either. The origins of the universe aren't logical. Who are we trying to impress? Why do we need to make our theology more rational than the universe itself? Logic oversteps when it makes more sense than reality itself. And so I think
I feel like I'm in the pub with you when you're talking. We got a beer between us right now.
Yeah, and so I think I wouldn't see the incarnation as God entering time for the first time 2000 years ago. I would say there's something becoming about Christ forever and for always. That's part of what he brings to the Trinity that allows God to begin to create in the very beginning. And in some ways, I think this is, I don't want to say it's unique, because everyone's terrified to pretend they're unique right now, because you have to be resourcing things. But it's, at least to me, it seems a unique way to explain what that whole verse about it being only through the Son that all things were made. Like it's because he has this becoming ability that the timeless Father has to create through his becoming to begin to create. And so in that sense, I don't want to have to say the incarnation occurs eternally, but the becoming of Christ, if that, which some might equate to the incarnation, I could see that, is not something that just happened 2000 years ago. He's been becoming always, and he is the becoming through which all other becoming is made, and the only reason why a timeless God could begin to create.
Yeah,
So
I hear a real I don't know, I sort of I hear a pastoral payoff in that, like an intimacy of created becomings with the eternal becoming. Like I can see it, I can see the pathway to deification in what you're telling me, because this is just
you're
who
just trying to get me fired. You, you're you're just like, come here. I got some. Come here.
You're on to me. You're on to me.
No, yeah, I can neither confirm nor deny the existence of a pathway to deification in my work. And it's not a subject that I cover in the book itself. Maybe it could be something I get into at a later time once I have a more secure vocational future.
Got you. Got you.
No, not, but yeah, no, it's I think, yeah, it's not something I'm interested in getting too much into now, but I see why it's an important question, and it's maybe something I need to explore more further on.
What
So
are you what are you up to now? Now that this book's out, what's the next burning thing you're working on?
yeah, well, let me just pitch myself here.
This is
So
invitation.
my other book just came out this last week, 1 week ago. This is
Oh,
Space
congratulations.
God, which in the camera will be backwards, and you won't be able to read it. So I don't know why I'm bothering to hold it up.
Hold it
But
a little
it's
closer and I can see that subtitle.
all right. It's Space God, rejudging the debate between Moore, Newton, and Einstein.
Forward by
Uh,
Doug Deadly. Nice.
it's basically looking at Henry Moore's theory of divine space and seeing if it has any contemporary merit or lessons that can be gleaned from it post Einstein and the relativization of space. And I don't necessarily come down too strong on one side or the other, but yeah, it's the book that I just wrote that just came out. And
Congratulations.
it's similar. It's not Trinitarian in the way that monotheism was, but it is cosmological. Space and time and Einstein and these types of things. And part of the book's historical. I'm trying to make an argument that Newton grounded the new physics upon a very theological premise, not just casually in the sense that he just so happened to be a passionate Christian, but in the sense that it actually is part of the foundations of the metaphysics that ground his physics.
Uh,
And I'm trying to say that in some ways, the modern scientific world doesn't make sense without the move that he made. And so that's the descriptive historical side of the project. And then the second side of the projects where I kind of just go crazy and experiment with some different constructive stuff and try to propose a new argument for the existence of God from space and some other crazy stuff that I don't know if it totally pans out, but I had a heck of a lot of fun with it. So,
and as you said, that's the only kind of book you write. The ones that are a heck of a lot of fun.
yeah.
Well, I'm looking forward to reading that one too, and I'm hoping that the next time you and I get together, it's actually at a pub. And
Are you going to AAR?
I will be there for a bit. I'm not
Oh,
going to be there for too long because I'm working on some family plans, but I will be there for at least 24 hours.
oh, cool. Well, perhaps we'll run into each other. So,
It's just down the street from me, so it's a lot easier for me to get in and out.
yeah.
Yeah.
So cool. Well, it would be love to see you there. And yeah, Space God's out. If people want to read anything else after monotheism, but also look out for new Trinitarian ontologies. The anthology that I've got coming out with John Milbank and Ryan Hacker, which
On that,
is more in the vein of monotheism in the sense that it's, we're talking about the Trinity and ontology and those types of things. So
you're cranking some stuff out right now.
yeah, well, I mean that's an anthology. Those are easier to pull off. I
I
mean,
don't
but
think it's just hard in a different way, maybe.
yeah, that's a good way to put it. It's Yeah.
Great meeting you, Jonathan. Look forward to seeing you again sometime soon. Congratulations on all this stuff that's been happening.
Yeah, well, thank you. It was lovely to meet you, and I appreciate you having me on. So.